So my name is Amani. I work at the National Oceanography Centre, and I'm going to present on the ReSOW UK project alongside Sarah. She'll do the second half of the talk. First thing I want to point out is that our disciplines, the project is very broad, but I mainly work on carbon and sediments, and then Sarah's going to talk, works mainly on the ocean accounting side, which she's going to talk about. But we'll try and answer, obviously I'm going to try and explain the whole project and try and answer questions on it as well. Yeah, just putting this slide up to kind of show how many, there's 2 of us here today, but just to show how many people have been involved in the project, so, and the main institutions that are involved in that, alongside all these partner organisations which have been involved in the project. So the project, ReSOW stands for the Restoration of Seagrass for Ocean Wealth, and the project is to inform interventions in the management of seagrass to align with local, national, international priorities, but to include the needs of local stakeholders and to take into account the long-term sustainability of coastal communities. In the last couple of days, we've had a stand downstairs, and a few people have been asking us, oh, what is our restoration work? The project itself doesn't do any seagrass restoration. We're not planting seagrass ourselves. Some of our partners are, Project Seagrass, for example, but this is more about informing how that happens. So we'll just start with a sort of project overview and the sort of schematic. So we've got 4 objectives within the project: to evidence the value of seagrass restoration by conducting a national seagrass natural capital assessment, to understand the role of the social factors and governance structures in seagrass management and how those can be used and improved to support the restoration of seagrass, identifying optimal intervention locations for seagrass restoration that would maximise the benefits and ecosystem services that it provides, and then finally to create a novel ecosystem services coastal enhancement decision support tool, which is called SEEDS. So this is all kind of represented in this schematic here, where we have the kind of social attitudes, historical decision-making, governance structures feeding in to the ecosystem services mapping, understanding carbon stocks, fisheries indexes, and cultural aspects, which feed into the ocean accounts and then feeds into our SEEDS tool. We've got 7 case study sites, which sort of represent different environments, but also different societies, I guess. And all of our kind of work has taken place in these locations, but then we've also done some work in additional locations as well. We got a little bit more spread out than just these 7. So I'm just going to run through like the different aspects of the project, just so you can get an idea of like what each of the different things is. So our colleagues in Swansea have created a habitat suitability model. So in sort of basic sense, it's looking at which locations around the UK and Ireland are going to actually be able to support seagrass. We've lost somewhere between 42 and 90% of the seagrass beds around the UK. So, and many different reasons for that. But one of them, I think, is that nobody even knows what seagrass is, and especially now that we don't have any. So it's quite interesting to see like where it possibly could be, which is in quite a few locations. Obviously, with modelling, it's a model, and it's also for the whole of the UK, it's at quite a coarse resolution. So take the results with a pinch of salt, and you'll have to do your own more detailed investigations, but it gives you the first impression. At our case study sites, we have higher resolution modelling, so it goes much more into the kind of sea lochs and bays, and and yeah, it's just at a higher resolution. So the model has been created using a wide range of parameters. Seawater temperature, bathymetry, light availability, salinity, wave action, substrate, etc. But the modeling also depends on the availability of data, and that's, I'm sure a lot of people understand, quite difficult to get hold of at the resolutions that we require it. So if you want to find out more about it, we've published 3 papers already on this aspect of the project, and there's another one in prep, and they're all linked through our website, so it should be really easy to find. So then the next issue is seagrass mapping. And this is, I think a lot of people working in seagrass understand the problems of this. Areas of seagrass, they're underwater a lot of the time. The patches don't stay the same year to year, they change size. So on the ground, it's, you know, if you were to go out and do a survey by just measurement, that's a very time-consuming and costly process. So there's a lot of interest in mapping seagrass and satellite data, but that comes with its challenges to do with the heterogeneity of our coasts, really. And the other vegetation that is present that isn't seagrass causes us with quite a lot of problems. So we did struggle with this aspect, but we have managed to crack it, I think, to a large extent, doing mapping from using Sentinel-2 data. Alongside, very importantly, always want to stress that there still has to be training data from those ground surveys. But we have been able to do it, and we think there is potential for this to be used for monitoring, and it is certainly could increase our knowledge of seagrass and where it is more quickly than we're able to do it by running about and doing all the surveys. And so, yeah, we've got a paper in prep on this as well. So we've done a lot of work on very important part of the seagrass system, fisheries and biodiversity support, surveys at all 7 of our location, going out and doing very intensive scene netting, collecting information on species composition, and then putting those into together with other available data to create fisheries residency indexes and commercial fisheries valuation. So again, we've got a couple of papers there in prep for that. I managed to be patient. I was very tempted to press that button again. Okay, so this is the area that I'm most involved in. Our original plan with the carbon was to go to our 7 case study sites and take 5 cores at each of those sites, analyze them for organic carbon and grain size, and calculate the sedimentation rates from carbon dating. And that plan completely changed. We've taken, because of the interest in seagrass and the carbon storage, really, basically, because there's so much interest in it, so many people wanted to be involved in it, that it just expanded wildly. So we have 20 sites, 164 cores. We've done a bit more analysis on those cores. We changed the sedimentation rate, the dating of the cores, to use try and use radionuclides and heavy metals, which depends on where around the country, what you can use depends on where around the coast it is. But we think that's more effective than the carbon dating. And also it's proving tricky and something that people are really desperate to get information on. It's a bit of a gap at the minute. So at the minute for the carbon, we have an awful lot of data. And yeah, people over the last few days have been really excited to see, you know, some of that information about the sites that we actually went. We haven't just done a calculation of the carbon from someone else's data at the seagrass sites in our case studies. We've actually measured it and calculated it from there. And the next plan is, using all this information, is to try and create a model similar to the habitat suitability model, where we could estimate what you might get around the whole country from all the cores that we've taken at all these different sites, under all these different environmental conditions that we've got information on now. So, also looking at cultural values. So the colleagues in Stirling University are looking at this aspect, and they've done willingness to pay survey and analysis. And this goes back again to the aspect of people not seeing seagrass and not knowing what it is. So it's actually quite difficult to ask people about. So it's a bit of a process of asking people about it and then telling them what it is and then asking them again. But a good way to get the word out about what seagrass is and its importance. This has been a national survey, so it's not just people that live at the coasts, but it's people that live inland and travel to the coast as well, and their perception of the quality of seagrass and what it provides. Yeah, so you can see the map here. Unsurprisingly, we've got less points in the sort of more remote locations, and more kind of around England and South Coast. But they've got good results on that. And one of the challenges is how to bring this together with our hard science data. Just got that in my head now. We're not going to be able to stop seeing it. And as we spoke about, we also need to understand, if we want to restore seagrass, what are the social and governance factors at each of these locations. So for each of our case study sites, you had to do stakeholder mapping and interview people. We did pilot studies, and there's information on that on the SEEDS tool, which I'm about to come on to in a minute, and also some papers. Well, one submitted and one still in prep. So the main thing that I want to talk about is how we've tried to bring all that information together into something that everyone can access and use. So this is our SEEDS tool. There's a QR code at the top. So it is not complete. It's still going to be a work in progress for a while. We're going to be adding data to it. But it is available to use and to explore it. There is also a questionnaire there, and we're grateful for feedback, basically, because we can tweak it and improve it and change things depending on what our users are finding. So as I said, it's the Coastal Ecosystem Enhancement Decision Support Tool. And it's integrating the data from the whole project, but we're also integrating it with third-party data. So you can then visualize a whole different set of data, not just the things that we've collected, and hopefully use that to start to make some decisions. It also allows users to upload their own data. So we've got a little add button here, and you can put in any data that you have about a location and then visualize that alongside the data in the tool. Users can also create and download images. So you can, as in a sort of GIS, move the layers around, create an image of a location that you want to present, and then sort of to have a snapshot of that to use on a slide. So that's a kind of like higher level, perhaps for people that don't use GIS, that they're able to interrogate the data just through our web tool. But then the other thing that you can do is all the data that is on there is available for download. So if you want to look at it more closely or compare it with your own data and produce your own mapping, whatever you want to do with it, you can then download it and use it yourself. So we were trying to think about the different ways that people might want to use it. They're different, they're different levels. experience or the availability of like using GIS. And the code for the tool is also really available to download. So it's just a completely open thing. So the levels of the data that we've got on here from our that we've collected from the project so far, I'm just going to quickly show you that sort of individually. So basically these are our case study sites, and for each of those from the kind of social and governance side, there's a PDF information on each of the different sites about what we know about each of those locations. So you just basically click on it and you can download the PDF. And then this is the habitat suitability modelling. So as I said, we've got like the UK-wide one at a lower resolution, and then this is Orkney here, which is one of our case study sites, and therefore we've got it at a higher resolution. So you can see here that the menu allows you to pick that, and you can also change the colours to suit you, make them like more or less opaque so you can see what's underneath, or change the way it's layered up so you can, you know, create your image that you want, you know, as you want to visualize it, and I hopefully try and make it as useful as possible to other people. And as I said, you can also just download the data, take it away, and use it however you need. So this is the seagrass extent. So you can see this is from the satellite data, and you can see we've mapped quite a few areas here around the south coast. This is Studland Bay, and yeah, we're really confident in how these have come out now. They are taken from they're sort of on a 3-year cycle of satellite images, because the UK, you don't get clear skies that often. You've got to get what information you can, even on the south coast. It's harder the further north you go. So yeah, so to get enough nice clear sunny days at the time when the seagrass is also growing, we need to take a 3-year block of data and integrate that into the mapping. But that sort of like looks for the presence of the seagrass, and it has to appear in all those images for it to appear on our map. So we're very confident then that the seagrass is there in that location. But then if something happens to that seagrass, we will be able to see it straight away, because it will come straight out of the, so because it won't be there if it's not in the next year. If something happens to it and it disappears in the next year, then it won't be in that 3-year block. So we'll be able to actually monitor that change sort of more quickly, or we wouldn't expect a sudden massive new patch to grow. So it's not really relevant in that sense. But if you have something happen to it and there's big degradation, we could see that come out quite quickly. Yeah, so that's quite an interesting thing to note that we were talking about last week, how that would work. And then here we've got Loch Rignish, and this is just the first kind of stage of the carbon calculation. So this is just basically taking the cores that we've got. It's just doing some basic sums, adding up how much. Once you've done all the difficult analysis of the carbon in the lab, it's a basic process of adding it all up and then calculating it by the year. But I think the important thing to say is the carbon has actually been taken from those locations. So, you know, it is a kind of like true answer, if you like. And in Loch Rignish, these are very small seagrass patches. So yeah, and then that appears when you go into the satellite data, you click on it and it just gives you that number. And then the next stage will be to add this kind of modeling element to it so that we can understand how much carbon you might get if you did plant seagrass in the location. And then this is the front page of the tool. So when you scan this QR code at the top here, this is what you'll get. It has to do a survey. And you just click anywhere on that, it disappears and takes you straight into the map. We have got the sand downstairs, so I'll go down at lunchtime and you can come and talk to us, and there's a poster about it, and have a little bit of a look and explore. But yeah, happy for you to share it with anyone who might wish to look at it, basically. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah.
Hello, so I'm Sarah Driscoll. I'm also at the National Oceanography Center, and I'm going to talk about natural capital assessment and natural capital accounting. So at the center of this project, Project ReSOW, is a natural capital assessment specifically tailored to seagrasses here in the UK. And we have chosen to use what's called the Global Oceans Account Partnership Framework to organize all the environmental, social, and governance data that Amani's just walked us through. But before I get into how I've done that with the assessment, I want to spend a few slides explaining what a natural capital assessment is. So a natural capital assessment measures and maps both the natural capital stocks, which in this case means the ecosystems like seagrasses, and the ecosystem services that flow to people. The result can be a specific value for these services, but values don't have to be financial. They can be biophysical and they can be social. Mapping and measuring the natural capital, our natural ecosystems allows decision makers to strategically manage their natural capital stocks and prioritize beneficial locations to preserve, to restore, and sustainably use those ecosystem services and therefore the values that they provide. Now, natural capital assessments then feed into environmental economic accounting. And natural capital accounting then allows us to track the current stocks of our natural ecosystems and their environments and how they change through time. Now, importantly, the accounts are standardized, replicable approaches recognized that are recognized internationally. And a framework which encompasses this sort of environmental economic accounting is called SEA. So sorry, I'm going to throw some acronyms at you, but it's the System of Environmental Economic Accounting. So it's a bit of a mouthful. So the SEA builds on the System of National Accounts, which is the internationally recognized framework for quantifying economic activity, which GDP is derived from. And so the SEA is important because unlike the System of National Accounts, we start to evaluate natural ecosystems and the stocks and values that they provide, building on the economic framework. Now, because seagrasses play such a critical role in marine ecosystems and provide numerous ecological, economic, and social benefits, assessing and accounting for their natural capital and the services that they provide into a recognized environmental economic accounting is essential for their sustainable management. The estimated loss of seagrass meadows in the UK ranges from 44 to 92%, so it's quite significant. And 40% of that loss is thought to have occurred since the 1980s. So with ocean accounting, we can start to monitor these losses and hopefully gains to this ecosystem. And then we can start to quantify how changes in the environmental asset or the ecosystem extent affects the services and values that society derives from it. And then furthermore, the natural capital accounts will play into the larger scheme of the UK's goal to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And this recognizes that we need to reduce our emissions across all sectors of the economy, but we also need to rely on innovative and nature-based solutions to help mitigate carbon. And seagrasses have a lot of potential in this because they can potentially be a great carbon sink. So that's my pitch for natural capital accounting. Now, furthermore, the GOAP framework, the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership Framework that I'm using, goes beyond the SEA because it's explicitly designed to support marine and ocean ecosystems. And the main goal is to go beyond GDP. So we don't just want to figure out economic values that our natural capital that we're getting from our natural capital, but rather we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals set forth by the UN And we want to help support the nationally determined contributions that are set in accord with the Paris Agreement. To visualize this, so this is a representation of the framework because it's quite hard to visualize how all these bits come together. But essentially, we can tie in the environmental asset, which is just the economic way of saying the extent of the ecosystem of interest. And then we can start to map how the ecosystem extent provides ecosystem services, and therefore there might be a monetary value in those ecosystem services that are derived, and therefore there's a flow to the economy. And we need to figure out how the governance structure fits in with this, and then other benefits and costs that we get from this ecosystem. And we've done this now in the context of the restoration of seagrasses, because that's what ReSOW is trying to underpin. And so how is this done? It's essentially through a series of tables and maps and other graphics. And I promise I won't throw too many tables at you and try to keep it interesting. But the very first thing to do is to understand the extent of the ecosystem that we're looking at. So in this case, again, it's seagrass. And that's because it's fundamental to creating a comprehensive ecosystem account, because the extent establishes the spatial and quantitative baseline from which all the other ecological and economic assessments can be derived. By mapping and quantifying the extent of the ecosystems, then we can start to track changes over time and identify gains and losses, where they're occurring. And this baseline data is critical for assessing the provision of ecosystem services and understanding how these services contribute to human well-being and economic activities, and at what scale. So to do this, I drew on publicly available data sets in addition to the case study sites that we had within the project. And so each of the devolved nations actually has its own data set in one place or another, and tracking them down was quite difficult. And they're all compiled slightly differently, so there's variations between them. And so the first thing I did was find them and figure out who put them together. And then from that data set, I started to pay attention to like how the methods and whatnot to come up with the actual seagrass extent account, which I've blurred out because I'm hoping to publish this, and so I don't want anybody to steal the numbers. But I've done it using these data sets and different sources. And so that's, if we think of that as the assessment, then the next thing that I want to do is the accounting. And so now I want to draw on the methods that Amani was saying with the remote sensing. This could be a really valuable way for us to start to monitor it and see if we are losing it further or where it's growing. And hopefully we'll start to see gains in this ecosystem. So for flows to economies and to describe the ecosystem services, I didn't want to put up a bunch of tables because they're boring to look at, but also they're still being put together. And so Amani gave us a really nice idea of all the work that's being done around carbon, and this will go into essentially a table and make up the account so that we can value it in the physical terms, so how much carbon is there, and describe it that way. But we can also potentially get an economic value for that carbon by applying the market value of carbon that's put together by either like the emissions trading carbon scheme or something similar to that. Within the project, there has been work around the provisional services and identifying how much support communities and local people get. And so taking that data, we can put it into these accounts to see actually how much economic activity is associated with these patches of seagrass. And if in the case study sites, because they're so specific to a patch of seagrass, we can actually assess what it's worth. One of the ways that we explored the cultural services provided by Seagrasses, as Imani had touched on, was these willingness to pay surveys. So these offer a tool for assessing the value that people place on intangible goods and services, such as recreational trips and activities around seagrass. And these surveys that were conducted within the project were designed with a hypothetical scenario in which a participant expressed how much they would be willing to pay to secure a benefit or avoid a loss, in this case, the loss of seagrass. And then we used incremental improvements to seagrass to see if that would increase their willingness to go and visit. And the survey took place all over. The participants were scattered throughout the whole of the UK. And from this, we can start to tease out the potential economic value associated with restored seagrass meadows. And part of the accounts also wants to consider governance. And so this is quite experimental within the Global Ocean Accounts Partnership Framework. They've sort of loosely defined what they want to see, but there's quite a lot of work that could be done. And so what I've done is I've used the data from our partners in the project who did the governance work to start to elucidate these barriers and solutions for scaled seagrass restoration to occur in the UK, and basically generated a table that identifies all the different types of marine protected areas and other marine designations and how they specifically pertain to seagrass and other activities on the seabed. And this way we can get some spatially explicit rules for decision making for marine licenses related to seagrass restoration if they're required, where they're required, as well as other activities on the seabed. And so the major outputs coming from the ocean accounts is that this is the first ocean account for seagrasses in the UK. And I've reached out to the Office of National Statistics that has a natural capital accounting team, and they've put together natural capital accounts for the terrestrial side of things in the UK, but they've also started doing marine accounts. Their first one came out in 2021, and they're planning on doing an updated version of that to come out next spring. And hopefully they will like the work that we've done around seagrasses and include that in there. And we've got a manuscript in prep about maybe a perspective piece about how difficult it is to get an ecosystem asset account put together for a submerged ecosystem. And ultimately, this will help support the policy, hopefully, for net zero 2050 and sustainable management of our ecosystems. Thank you.